Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The province is cracking down on short-term rentals, enabling higher municipal fines and creating a mandatory provincial registry. The goal is to open up those units for long-term renters. Well, how will these new rules affect you? We want to hear from you if you're an owner or a renter. What's been your experience with short-term rentals and their impact on housing? After 12:30, cookbook author Carly Bodrug is known on social media for her food scrap hacks. She'll join us and let us know about your own favorite ways to cut down on food waste. I'm Michelle Eliot. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, live streaming on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. This morning, the BC government announced new rules for those listing rooms or suites on short-term rental platforms like Airbnb or Vrbo. They include a mandatory provincial registry and only allowing short-term rentals in your principal residence. And that includes a secondary suite or a laneway home. And this applies if you live in a municipality of 10,000 people or more. Here's Premier David Eby.
The first is that if you live in a city with 10,000 people or more, there will be a provincial legal requirement that you not operate a short-term rental unless it is part of your principal residence, either a secondary suite or a laneway home. In addition, we are eliminating what are called non-conforming clauses. It's a technical loophole that allowed, in Victoria, for example, 1,600 short-term rental units to continue operating despite municipal rules that apply to everybody else. As of May 1st, those rules will apply equally across the city, and that loophole will be closed. The second action is we're establishing a floor across the province for municipalities 10,000 or more to ensure that the same rules are in place across British Columbia and backing it up with provincial enforcement. A new enforcement team that will support the efforts led by municipalities and regional districts. And then finally, we're increasing the fines associated with breaking the rules for both individuals who decide that the rules shouldn't apply to them, as well as for the platform companies that would decide to flaunt these rules. This accountability is essential and will support local governments with the data that they need from these platforms to be able to ensure that their bylaws are effective. These actions will return literally thousands of homes back to the market. We are taking an all-hands-on-deck, all-of-the-above approach to housing. This is one more step in our larger housing strategy to ensure BC is a great place to visit for tourists, but also to live for the people who make this province go.
That's Premier David Eby speaking this morning. We'll take your calls on this in a few minutes. New rules and regulations for short-term rentals. If you're a host, how will new restrictions affect you? And if you're a renter, what's your experience with short-term rentals and their impact on housing? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. By email, you can reach us at bctoday@cbc.ca. The CBC has reached out to Airbnb for a response to this new legislation. They say they are digesting it before issuing comment, and that should come this afternoon. Well, for more on this, CBC's Provincial Affairs reporter Mira Baines joins me now from the legislature in Victoria. Hi, Mira. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, or good morning, actually. Is it good afternoon or good morning now?
We have just past noon. You've been busy. I know you've been at the briefing. And
it's been a very busy morning.
And it's a lot to wade through as well. A lot of details. I've been looking through it as well. Take us through this legislation.
Yeah, Michelle, it's pretty complex. It was introduced today around 10 o'clock, and the news conference just wrapped up here in the rotunda at the legislature just a short while ago. And so Premier David Eby, you heard him speak, also Housing Minister Ravi Kahlon, and also the Mayor of Victoria. They were all here discussing some of the complexities of this legislation. And basically, Premier Eby sort of laid out three key areas that they want to tackle with this legislation. And you heard heard him talk about fines, and then fines would be going up from $1,000 a day for hosts to $3,000 a day, as well as platforms. If they fail to comply, those fees could be in the tens of thousands of dollars. He even said that they could be up to $100,000 if they fail to comply with some of these new rules that will be going into place. And so these rules are considered to be pretty significant in terms of what's happened in the past, in terms of municipalities and bylaws. And the second key area, aside from increasing the fines and giving local governments stronger tools, is basically returning short-term rentals to long-term rentals to that market. They went over some of the stats, and they were saying that there are about 16,000 whole homes which are on some of these platforms. And so they want to return those, or even at least half of those, to the rental housing market. And then I think the third thing that they said that they wanted to do was establish stronger provincial rules, lay them out clearly, as well as establish an enforcement unit that will sort of crack down on some of the violators of some of these new rules that are going into place. But there were a lot of questions, Michelle, about this enforcement unit. How big will it be? What's their budget? When is it going into place? They said that it would be going into place by the end of the year, but some of that information was very vague around this enforcement unit.
Right. And so, given that some municipalities like Vancouver already has been trying to crack down on illegal suites, what more did the Premier or the Housing Minister have to say about how that enforcement will happen, how they will track down suites that are not registered or don't have a license fee?
Yeah, I think that is a key part of this legislation. So what they want to do is require short-term rental platforms to share data with the province, and then the province will be sharing data with local governments, so that way they can more easily enforce some of these violators and some of these rules. And so one of the things that they want to do is require platforms to list business license numbers on these listings, so they can quickly be investigated. These numbers will be linked to accounts, which will provide them with information about who owns a property and so on. And so those listings can be removed more easily if those business registration numbers are on those listings. And I think the other thing is it gives regional districts the ability to issue business licenses, so that way properties in rural areas can be regulated a bit more closely. And I also wanted you to take a listen to the mayor of Victoria. She has talked about how difficult it has been to crack down on some of these violators in the past. It can take months, and then people file appeals, and so one of these cases has even gone to court.
The provincial policies and oversight that have been introduced today will ease the burden on municipalities like Victoria, that have local policies aimed at maximizing a local housing supply, but which have struggled with trying to balance the number of short-term rentals that we have with that aim in providing more local supply. The two things in particular that Victoria is pleased about are the data sharing requirements. One of the frustrations we've had, of course, is being able to track how many STRs there are and how they fluctuate when they're used, who owns them, all of those different things which really make it difficult for us to actually evaluate and enforce our own regulations. When we come into a system which requires that type of data to be shared, that will really be helpful for us. We can't regulate what we don't know, and so being able to know this will be really, really helpful. The enforcement and compliance piece, incredibly important. One of the most frustrating things, again, for us as a local government is trying to find the resources to try and enforce our own regulations. A local bylaw, which are responsible for this type of work, are already very much under the gun and overextended in a variety of different responsibilities, and this just adds to that in a really significant way. So we really welcome the collaboration on the enforcement piece and look forward to that team being in place. Ultimately, what this is for us as Victoria, with a very high number of people who come to us as visitors and as a huge, obviously, investment in the tourism industry, this is about balance. We understand that people do want a diversity of experience in accommodation, and that there is a place for short-term rentals within a balanced economy. But for us, this is very much about making sure that we create enough of that diverse accommodation experience with as much permanent housing as possible. And these types of regulations are going to allow us to use some additional tools in order to find that balance for the city.
That's Victoria Mayor Marian Alto, who was at the news conference this morning. She sounds very welcoming of this new legislation, Mira, but she also talked there about, Victoria being such a tourist destination, that balance, right, between being able to provide housing, but still being a destination and offering different kinds of accommodations for people. How did reporters ask questions, and did the Premier or Housing Minister talk about that? Like, what's the reaction going to be from the tourism industry, from hosts who will be subject to these new rules?
Well, Michelle, I think one of the key questions here is also what will happen to hotel prices. There's already a shortage in hotel rooms for tourists. So is that going to make hotel room prices go up? And how is that going to affect tourism to some of these cities? For example, Victoria, Kelowna, Vancouver, these are prime destinations. How will they be affected by some of these new rules? And so even Premier Eby talked about, they're trying to find a balance in this case. There's hope that this will put more homes on the market for people to rent out, but as well as, they still want people to keep coming to BC and fueling our tourist economy. So it's going to be an interesting balance, but already people are pointing out, people can find loopholes, as they always do with this type of legislation. So we'll see just how effective it will be in the future.
So the plan is for this enforcement team to be in place by next fall. Can you take us through the timeline before I let you go?
Sure. Well, it's a significant timeline for the fines as well. So I just wanted to say that basically for the increase in fines, once this bill gets royal assent by the end of November, basically then those fines kick up from $1,000 a day to $3,000 a day. And then May 1st next year is when that principal residence rule goes in, where in urban centers or cities with more than 10,000 people and less than a 3% rental vacancy rate, that principal residency rule will have to go into place. And then data sharing in the summer of 2024. And then the next phase is basically that provincial registry by late 2024. So there are significant steps that are going to happen over, I guess, the next year or so.
Mira, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
CBC reporter Mira Baines, a provincial affairs reporter, joining us from the legislature in Victoria. And we are opening up the phone lines to you. If you are a short-term rental host, how will these new restrictions affect you? If you're a renter, what's your experience with short-term rentals and their impact on housing? We would love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 or email us bctoday@cbc.ca. Jörg has been waiting on the line in Kelowna, certainly a tourist destination, also struggling with housing. Hi, Jörg.
Yes, hello.
Thanks so much for calling. What do you think of these new restrictions?
Well, I've got a couple of primary comments. One is that philosophically, I'm not a landlord, short-term or long-term, but philosophically, I'm opposed to the notion that government can just come in and tell me what to do with my property. I don't think that is what our country is built on. I think the primary premise is that if we own a property, whether it's real estate or otherwise, we have a primary right to do with it what we like to do with it. And we can't just have government come in and pull the feet out from under us for the thing that we want to do. So there's a philosophical concern with that. The other side of the story is that the residential tenancies branch has been so behind in adjudicating disputes between landlords and tenants that there are owners of property that have rented out the property while they were, for example, absent from the country for 6 months. And they come back and they cannot evict the tenants and they cannot get into their own place and they live in their cars because the tenants cannot, they haven't paid rent in months and months and months.
And this is someone you know or people that you know?
This was in news reports over the last 6 months.
Okay.
From all sorts, all over Canada. People have, but particularly in BC, people have literally slept in their cars because even though the tenants do not pay their rent, they cannot evict them.
Okay.
The residential tenancy branch does not take action because they are presumably overworked and understaffed. And here are these homeowners that absolutely have no rights left because they can't enforce them.
And so
while I sympathize with tenants, and I've always been against the feudal nature of hard and harsh leases, we cannot make the landlords into the boogeyman.
And so you're talking there about the inability, I guess, restrictions on how landlords are able to evict tenants if there are issues, and so they come up against this, they're not able to evict them. That
if I had a spare house,
yeah,
I would not rent it to a long-term rental because I'm afraid that the residential tenancy branch will not act if the tenant does not pay their rent. And there have been many such instances in this province and in others.
So you are deterred from long-term renting that second place, theoretically you're saying, renting that out long-term. You are more, it sounds more appealing to you to rent on a short-term rental because you wouldn't then have those same restrictions. Is that right?
Exactly.
And so what do you, I mean, you talk about owners sleeping in their cars, Jörg. You know, we've certainly heard stories about tenants sleeping in their cars. Say they're not, would-be tenants who aren't able to find affordable housing. And I take your point about what role the government does play. So to that, if the government is faced with people, becoming homeless or having to leave the province because they can't find affordable housing, these are units that are being put up on short-term rentals. What should government do then?
Well, the government needs to build the necessary housing. They've had years and years and years to plan for this, and they haven't done it. They've stepped away from it, and they've kept talking about let the market do its thing. But the market obviously is not that interested, not interested enough, hasn't been over the last 30 years. So that means the government has to build the housing. That's what other countries do, where they actually have the government build housing. We used to do that here in Canada, build housing, and the government had owned housing that was rental housing. Mm-hmm. So if the market is not doing it, then the government has to do it. And they have completely failed to live up to their obligation to the society at large and to the least privileged. Of course, that's who's affected by this. So this is a complete failure of government, and it is unfair to blame industry or to blame individual homeowners. These homeowners that we're now depriving of the revenue of short-term rental have bought that property with the prospect of the revenue that they can make. They're paying mortgages. This is not cash-paid property. They're paying mortgages that they have to pay off.
Okay.
And it may well be that the rental rate that they get for long-term rental is not sufficient to meet the mortgage obligations that they have engaged in because they thought they can make short-term rentals.
Jörg, good to hear from you in Kelowna. Really good discussion with you. Thanks so much for calling.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That's Jörg joining us from Kelowna. We'd love to hear from you. If you are a landlord, if you're a host, a homeowner who does list on a platform like Airbnb, what would new restrictions on short-term rentals mean for you? How would it impact you? If you're a renter, what's been your experience with short-term rentals and how they impact housing? Love to hear from you as well. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. And Scott is joining us from Vancouver Island. Hi, Scott.
Hi, good morning, or good afternoon, sorry. Also have properties, vacation home properties, and echoing the last caller, the cold day in hell before we put it back into the rental pool just to lose our home to tenants that don't pay rent and a government that won't collect it. So they've created this mess, their problem. And as far as I'm concerned, I will not be surprised to see an association bring forward a civil lawsuit against the province. A lot of these vacation homes have been doing it for decades. You cannot simply change the rules in the middle of the game.
What
would the impact
be on you, Scott? You said you had a couple of vacation homes. How many?
I'm not telling you that, but
okay. Well, what would the impact
not,
be on
sorry,
you?
I don't have multiple homes. We have a home.
Okay.
And with the implicant, they're huge. They're absolutely huge. They're taking it away from people that have, again, built our properties around the vacation home aspect, and now it's being taken away. You can't do that, and you won't allow it.
This sounds like it's really going to impact you, and you're quite upset about it.
To the point where many others have left, and we have the ability to leave this country, and we will. There's nothing left here. You guys, it keeps getting taken away and taken away to others that won't do what the Canadian dream was. Build your own dream. That's up to you. It's not up to me to give it to you.
Scott, thank you very much for weighing in on this too from Vancouver Island. Shandy is up next now in Vancouver. Shandy, you're an Airbnb host. You're also a renter.
I am. Yeah, I'm a long-term renter in Vancouver, and I've also been a long-time host of a space in the house that I live in. And I guess I support changes to how Airbnb is run in BC. I've seen both sides of it, how it's increasing rents in BC. My friends are finding it hard to find places to live. I happen to be lucky to be able to do this, but I use that room in my house to supplement my rent. Just in my neighborhood, I see brand new buildings being built that are being put up specifically for housing, and then they're being rented out as Airbnbs, like the whole property. And so I definitely support legislation to try and crack down on that.
Shandy, thank you very much for your call as well from Vancouver. We are asking you your reaction to new restrictions, new rules coming in from the province when it comes to short-term rentals. So they call it a crackdown on short-term rentals to free up those units essentially for long-term rentals. And part of it would be introducing a new registry, provincial registry, by which hosts would have to sign on, as well as not allowing or requiring that short-term rentals be in your principal residence. That would include a secondary suite or a laneway home, and that's if you live in an urban area, a municipality of 10,000 people or more. And that is what the province is saying would free up units for long-term rents. So we're asking you, if you are a host, a landlord, what impact would these rules have on you? And if you are a renter, what has been your experience with short-term rentals and their effect on housing? Our number again is 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. John is up next in Chilliwack. Hi, John. What are your thoughts on trying to curtail or cut back, reduce short-term rentals?
Well, it's a necessary evil. The reality is that the province has this 10-day notice to tenancy for unpaid rent. So if you as a renter cannot pay your rent within 3 days, most landlords are going to issue you an eviction notice. And the moment you get served, you got 10 days and then you're out. So if you're out and you can't get a short-term rental, you're going to be living in your car. And usually the people like that, myself included, because I just lost my job, 4 months ago, and I burned through 20,000 K, you're done. And so the predators are taking full advantage of this. And with the economy collapsing, the housing market collapsing like it did in 2008 in the U.S., I mean, the banks have pulled back on everyone's housing line of credit, credit restrictions on cards, everything is. They've just taken it all away. So we're heading for an economic free fall.
And so what do you think of these rules then?
Well, they're not helping. The government of BC created this problem. And the reality is, we have a housing crisis. We've got an economic crisis. We're all coming out of the pandemic, which was devastating to me and my family. And it was my mistake for trying to support my family so that they didn't get thrown out on the street during the pandemic. And we're all trying to recover from this. And the laws created by this province are just destroying us all.
You rent out on short-term rentals, do you?
No, I'm a long-term renter.
You're a long-term renter. Yeah. Okay. John, thank you very much as well. I can hear dejection in your voice. Thanks for the call. Deborah is joining us from Vancouver Island, our final caller on this today. Now, what's your reaction to these new incoming legislation or incoming rules on short-term rentals, Deborah?
So we operate a short-term rental. It's part of our primary residence. We've got a coach house, you could say. So for us, it sounds like it'll still be all right. Obviously, I need to dig into the legislation some more. But for us, we don't want to have a long-term tenant because we like to have that space available for friends and family. So there's certain times of the year that we're happy to share it and to rent it out. So it is really nice to be able to share on a short-term basis. The thought, and we've been landlords long-term before when we were still in Vancouver, but the thought of being a long-term landlord right now is scary, as to one of your other callers alluded to.
What makes it scary for you?
If there's issues, if people stop paying rent, I mean, there's nothing, your hands are so tied at this point. There's so many great tenants out there, and we were always really fortunate to have great tenants. And we always treated our tenants like clients, and we wanted to ensure that they were happy, they had everything they needed. I feel that we were really good landlords. But now, if you have the wrong person in, it's near impossible to get them out. They can stop paying rent for months. They can just refuse to leave. I think that the dynamic has shifted too far in the other direction, and I understand that there's some pretty bad landlords out there as well, but that component needs to be leveled before you can really encourage people to become long-term, full-time landlords.
Okay, and as you say, it sounds like your back lane house or your laneway house is exempt or covered again under these rules, but that regardless, you are not drawn to going back to being a long-term renter, to a landlord rather.
Honestly, right now, it's just you're too exposed.
Okay. Deborah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for weighing in as well from Vancouver Island. A lot of comments on this today on our open line. Email as well from Fiona, who writes in Fernie. She says, yes, it's a resort town of 6,000. We already have restrictions that whole homes cannot be rented short term, but this is blatantly disregarded by many. In addition, many are secondary vacation homes, hence a massive housing shortage and spiraling rental and house prices. I think that this rule she's referring to should be introduced in all towns and cities, not just ones over 10,000. There are critical housing shortages in small towns too. Fiona, thank you very much. Christian writes from Salt Spring Island, the housing crisis here is incredibly challenging for everyone, including employers who can't find staff, for nurses and doctors who can't find a place to buy or rent. Opting in and joining the province in order to be able to stop speculators from taking many more long-term rentals off the market can't be so bad as far as community living is involved. And that's a point that Christian is making. Part of this regulation that does require short-term rentals to be only offered in principal residences, but that only applies to municipalities with populations of 10,000 people or more. However, there will be an opt-in component for other municipalities. And I think that's what Christian is referring to. Thank you so much for all of your calls and all of your emails as well. We'll continue to follow this announcement, of course, throughout the day here on CBC. And you can continue to let us know what you think on our email, bctoday@cbc.ca. It's 12:35 now, 1:35 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC. And coming up in our next half hour, well, Canadians waste an enormous amount of food. So how can we cut down on food that just ends up being thrown out? Cookbook author Carly Bodrug has lots of ideas. She shares them on TikTok and Instagram. And her cookbook, she'll join us to take your calls. That's coming up after the CBC News Update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Legislation is expected this afternoon that will lay out clear direction for municipalities that want to change police forces. It comes as Surrey has asked for a judicial review to challenge the province's order the city continue its transition from the RCMP to a municipal force. Surrey's mayor favors ending the transition and returning to the RCMP. As we've been hearing on the show, the provincial government has introduced legislation to help municipalities regulate short-term rentals on sites like Airbnb. Fines have now tripled to $3,000 a day. All short-term rental platforms will also be required to share data with municipalities to improve local enforcement. And the union representing workers with Metro Vancouver is staging strike action today at all 5 sewage treatment plants. The Greater Vancouver Regional District Employees Union represents about 670 workers. They've been without a contract for almost 2 years. And now the forecast on the North Coast. Rain this afternoon with a high of 13. Highs reaching 10 with rain in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a risk of thunderstorms with periods of rain and a high of 11. Highs up to 17 with showers in some areas of the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, mainly cloudy with a high of 18. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, highs to 17 with rain, a risk of thunderstorms, and some strong winds. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
Thank you, Rob. We're talking about cooking and baking and all of that in just a moment. My 15-year-old on Friday, for the first time on his own, I think, baked some cookies. And so he got all the ingredients together, mixed them up and in different bowls. And he said, okay, Mom, I've got all my ingredients. What do I do next? And I said, okay, time to put your dough into the fridge. And he says, oh, I didn't know that. That's not what the recipe says. And I said, yeah, it says right there, chill for an hour. And he goes, oh, I thought that meant relax for an hour.
Did he? That's good.
Yeah, I had to clarify that for him.
Yeah, nice. That's a good. And so how did they turn out?
They turned out well because his mom was there to clarify that you actually, in fact, need to do something else and put them in the fridge.
I did not know you had to chill cookie dough.
You do. It actually helps. It helps them to bake better. I've done it without chilling them.
Yeah.
But also, it helps you relax.
Yeah, apparently.
Just be more chill. I'm just going to relax, kick back for an hour. That's what the recipe said.
Good strategy. I think he's got a future as a cookie baker.
As a baker. Oh, to be 15 again. Rob, thank you very much.
You bet.
As Robert Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. You're with BC Today here on CBC. We are on Radio 1, 88.1 FM, and live streaming on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. Yes, we are all very chill here too. Well, food costs, yes, they are eating up a lot of Canadians' budgets. And food inflation, of course, increasing by 5 to 7% this year. So as we struggle with those high prices, we may be trying to come up with ways not just to stretch our dollar, but to stretch those ingredients and find new life for leftovers and food scraps. So we're asking you, what are your favorite ways, your new ways that you found to reuse and save leftover food? And do you want to ask about more ways to use an ingredient? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone or email bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, Carly Bodrug has amassed millions of followers on TikTok and Instagram for her easy food scrap hacks. Her account is Plant You, and here's a sample video.
Stop letting your leftover cake go to waste.
Instead, throw that cake in a bowl and smash with a potato masher. Then roll it into golf-sized balls using your hands and place them in the fridge. Once they're set, pop in a skewer and dip in melted chocolate and sprinkles. Now you've got perfect cake pops. That is episode 70 of Scrappy Cooking, where nothing goes to waste.
That's Carly Bodrug's TikTok on using leftover cake. I love it. Cake pops. She is the best-selling author of the Plant You cookbook. And Carly joins me now. Hello.
Hi, Michelle. I am so thrilled to join you today. Talk about all about scraps and food waste.
I am thrilled to have you. I've been following you on social media, and some of the ideas you come up with just blow my mind, including the cake pops one. How did this even start for you?
Yeah, it's really funny. So I have been a food blogger since probably about 2019. And as a Canadian myself, food prices are pretty exorbitant and budgets get tight. And as well as that, I'm very passionate. I'm plant-based and passionate about eating a diet that's in line with being friendlier to the environment. And I heard a statistic a while ago that stopped me in my tracks. And that's about 30 to 40% of the food Canadians buy ends up in the trash, which is astonishing when we think about food prices. But what a lot of people don't realize is when our food ends up in trash and inevitably ends up in landfills, it actually is a big contributor to methane gas, which all ties into global warming. So I wanted to do something about it. These were things I was already doing in my kitchen. And I remember I threw up a video one day for candied orange peels and kind of walked away from my phone, as I do when I post a video, came back an hour later, and I could not believe the response. I think it had been viewed by 1 million people. People were going nuts over it. So that's how Scrappy Cooking was born. And since then, I believe I've done about 80 recipes that focus on using up the food we have, or even utilizing things like scraps to make delicious recipes.
Oh my gosh. And how do you, I love that, candied orange peels, because what do you do with the peel once you finish it? You can probably use some of the zest, but then what, right?
Yeah, zest, and even you can lemon peels and lime peels are great to keep around and add to vinegar and water in a spray cleaner. So there's a million different things you can do with scraps if you get creative.
Oh my goodness. Carly Bodrug is with me. Now she is a bona fide social media influencer, millions of followers on TikTok and Instagram, all to do with plant-based cooking and scrappy cooking, as she calls it. So using those food scraps to give them new life, and that way you cut down on your waste, on your costs, help to cut down on emissions too. So we're taking your calls. What are your own favorite ways to reuse leftovers and food scraps? And if you have a question, maybe there's an ingredient you would like Carly to come up with a solution for, you can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Yvonne is joining us from Vernon. Hi, Yvonne.
Hi, how are you?
I am just fine. And what's your scrappy cooking hack?
Well, I have done this for years, even before the food costs went up. I make homemade soups, but while I'm cooking and making vegetables or salads, I save the leftovers of a piece of celery, onion, a little bit of carrot, and the vegetables that don't get eaten at a meal go into a Ziploc bag in the freezer. And when it's time to make soup, I've got all my veggies cut up and ready to go, and they haven't been wasted.
Not at all. That's fantastic. Everything just goes in there. There's your stock. Yvonne,
I love
Carly, you like it, eh? I mean, that is, yeah.
We call it scrappy stock. So you can literally add just about anything in there. And I always love to add just like a little bit of turmeric and a little bit of salt and garlic. And anytime it's going to come out beautiful. And then you have stock for all of your soups in the future. And then you'll thank your future self for it too.
That's right. Exactly. You can look back and say, I'm so glad I did that. Okay. I was thinking of you yesterday because I roasted some asparagus. And so I have the ends. And I have them all compiled into a bowl right now. Are those things I can put into a stock? What do you do with
Yes. So in my new book, actually, I have a recipe that utilizes the ends of asparagus in a dip. So I am obsessed with this spicy edamame and kale dip from a grocery store in Ontario. And I remade it at home, and it's edamame, kale. And then I just one day, like you, had the ends of the asparagus, and I threw those in as well with some jalapenos. Oh my goodness.
Oh my
gosh.
It's
so good. So good. So you can certainly utilize those. You could even add them to a soup and puree them. The big things about the woody asparagus ends is they're hard to eat just like on their own. So you have to get a little bit creative with it.
Okay. How do you come up with these?
I think I also have a journalism background, so I'm just naturally very curious, and I think I just love food and I love experimenting with things. And like, this is something I could talk about and do all day. So I think I just found my niche and have honed in on it, and thankfully I'm okay at it. So we've been rolling now for a few years. So hopefully I can continue with the ideas.
I appreciate the journalism background. I mean, there must be some science in there too, because I picture you sort of like, a scientist with all the test tubes and everything mixed. Is this going to work? Is this going to work? But is there a lot of experimentation involved?
Absolutely, there is. So I think at first I would throw up a recipe with not too many tests, but as you go in and you see that people are actually making the recipes that you're posting, there's a responsibility for me too, that I don't want people wasting food when they make something that I make. So we absolutely test recipes multiple times. There's been many failures. I always tell the story of I had to test a vegan meatloaf recipe for my first cookbook probably about 8 times. And to this day, my husband will not have vegan meatloaf because he had to eat so many renditions. So like we'll eat the food. He will eat the food, but I want it to be perfect by the time it gets to my viewers.
He has the benefit of testing the first, second iteration.
Yeah, the benefit and the detriment sometimes,
right.
But hopefully more of a benefit.
Taking your calls with cookbook author Carly Beaudrug. You can find her on social media at PlantU. And we're asking you, how do you reuse food scraps, your leftovers, and what are your questions too? Lots of comments coming in. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can email us too, bctoday@cbc.ca. And Carol writes, I use all of my food leftovers, aging vegetables, etc., and make delicious meals. Thanks to the internet, you can basically put in the ingredients needed to be used, and like magic, a recipe appears. It helps to have basic ingredients. Oh, this is a good tip. It helps to have basic ingredients like onions, garlic, pasta, and rice, and spices on hand, and some knowledge of your favorite types of flavors like Mediterranean or Asian, etc. I just want to go back to Carly on that. That's a really good tip, isn't it? To have some basic spices and flavorings and carbohydrates in place so you can mix things up.
Yeah, I always say to people that beginning a kind of food waste reduction journey in your own home really starts by learning to utilize what you have in your fridge. So exactly what she's saying is having these kind of base meals. So every day and every week in our kitchen, at the end of the week, we'll take a survey of the food that we have on hand. And maybe it's kind of like a wilting box of spinach in the back of the fridge and a bell pepper that's seen better days. And you can utilize just about any of these vegetables in base recipes, like a pasta, like a delicious red curry, and just swap in what you have. So I completely agree with that advice. And the number one tip I give people who are wanting to reduce their food waste is when they head to the grocery store, head with a plan. So this can be as simple as like writing down your breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the week, what you plan to have, just a scribble note, so that when you're heading to the grocery store, you're not aimlessly looking around and buying a bunch of food that you're not going to eat. And then also thinking about how you can make meals with overlapping ingredients. So perhaps you're having a spinach pasta one night, and then the next day, you're going to make a spinach smoothie. So just making sure that you're using up those ingredients rather than heading into the week with no plan, and then it's Friday and you're like, oops, I didn't use any of this delicious fresh produce.
Oh, yeah. No, that's true. I'm a big fan of the smoothie, tossing things in there. Keith is joining us next in Vancouver. Hi, Keith.
Hi there. How are you?
I am fine. What are some ways you reduce food waste?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this for a lot the past kind of maybe 20 years, to be quite honest. My first experience with food waste was probably in Japan. I was at a grocery store and they had a peach, and I didn't realize what was going on, but they were calling them. They were taking out the ones that were a little bruised, and I asked the gentleman if I could buy it, and he kind of looked at me very puzzled, and he said, sure. And I remember I bought it for 70 years back in 2000. And I clearly remember the juices of that peach dripping down my arm. I still remember it. It was incredible. And it just had a little ding in it.
Right.
So to your point with your guests and your callers is, yes, having basic food, but also realizing that, your yellow broccoli or your wilted spinach is, once it's thrown in a soup, magic. Nobody knows.
That's right.
So there's that. And also cooking skills. Basic food, but cooking skills. I volunteer with a group called Growing Chefs, I think you're familiar with.
Yes.
And we teach kids about food and where it comes from. And the biggest word I try to get across to these guys is substitution. if your potato soup calls for Yukon Gold. I know there's a lot of people that, I see them in the grocery store following the recipe, and it's like, well, if you don't have Yukon Gold, maybe red potatoes will work. Sometimes you do need a specific ingredient. I get that, but a lot of the time, and sometimes your yellow potatoes are maybe 50 cents, $1 a pound versus $2 for the ones that were required. So you're a lot of cost savings there. I made a yellow broccoli soup the other day from, originally broccoli soup, but it turned out to be a yellow broccoli
I love
soup.
that yellow broccoli soup.
It's amazing.
From broccoli that was going for last weekend for Thanksgiving, and I had that left over. And there's just all kinds of ways. I think we just also realized that if it's starting to go a little bit, I know some people just boom. There's a little bit of a ding on your $4 red pepper, and in the compost it goes. It's incredible.
Yeah,
And lastly, I remember being in Costa Rica. I was at a hostel and I had some hot dogs, and I had some ingredients put in, but I looked in the fridge and I ended up calling them hot dogs completos. It had everything. 3 types of mustard, 2 types of mayo, relish, pickles. The best hot dog I've ever had, and it was just things that were left in the fridge. So, yeah.
Wondering how tall that was after all of
it was
that.
a big one.
Keith, what a great call. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Amazing. That's awesome.
What he said there too, right? Having that familiarity or that confidence to use a substitute ingredient. What are your tips for people so they can be as confident and say, yes, it calls for yellow Yukon Gold potatoes, but I can use these red ones too. What are your tips for that?
Confidence is such a huge thing in the kitchen, and it's funny as a food blogger because I get these questions a lot, like, "Oh, can I leave bell pepper out of this recipe?" And the answer is 99.9% yes. And I think really this comes down to getting your hands dirty in the kitchen. So leaning on a cookbook or your favorite blog and starting to cook. I think once you learn some basic recipes that you love, that's when it gets really fun to start experimenting. So like I said, we have a few different meals that rotate in our house that are on rotation, but substituting whatever we have on hand. So one of them would be like a red curry. If you're a curry fan,
yes.
definitely learn. Red curry can come together in literally 20 minutes, and it can use up any vegetable you have on your fridge. I'm plant-based. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are not, but we make a bolognese pasta sauce probably every week. We throw all our vegetables into a food processor. So that could be mushrooms, bell peppers, onions, garlic, you name it, spinach, and use that as like a veggie ground in the pasta sauce, which could also work with ground beef as well to even sneak in some veggies. So that's a great one. So just getting these staples down, like Keith was saying, is so critical to reducing your food waste. And then also to his point about expiry dates. So this is one of the number one reasons that Canadians throw away food, is because we're worried about spoilage. So I am certainly not telling anybody to eat spoiled food, but just being using your judgment and looking. You can probably slice up a part that's browning. If there's a scent there, obviously you don't want to eat it, but a lot of the times it is okay to eat something just a little bit past its expiry or best before.
Okay. Really. And again, yes, you're not saying, don't be safe with your food. But yeah, absolutely. Those best before dates they've come up a lot in terms of how people view them. Let's take another call from Joseph in White Rock now. Hi, Joseph.
Hi, how are you?
I am fine. Thanks for calling. What do you want to say about reusing leftovers?
Well, I'm hearing all this great stuff, but the one thing about yellow broccoli soup is, you go to a high-end restaurant and they serve that, man, you could sell that for $20 a bowl.
Absolutely.
Right? Oh, it's so cool.
That's right.
And the reason I say that, and I sort of, my father was an executive chef. He was at the Bayshore once upon a time, but since then, lots of resort hotels, and I grew up in a hotel. But if you've ever gone to a real commercial kitchen where food cost and waste are KPIs for an executive chef, you would not believe how little waste there is. I mean, the waste in a kitchen usually comes from bad planning. You have a banquet for 200 people, but you make 220 of whatever. Yeah. But the real waste, doesn't happen. You would have no idea how efficient it is when you have your own butcher, your own bakery. this and that. Your buns and bread today are stuffing and croutons tomorrow. You can put everything in. You think about the stuff you buy, like even packaged goods. Those companies try not to waste stuff. So if you're buying like V8, what do you think's in that? It's also the green part of a carrot that's the bushy on the top. Like, you can use everything in your kitchen. All you got to do, like you said, is learn how to cook. But I mean, first of all, you got Google that'll help you with substitutions. But other things, like if you have a half rotten potato, cut the rotten part off. Guess what? The other half's perfect.
That's what Carly was just saying. Now, Joseph, I just want to get to a tip that I think you have about carrot tops.
No, I was talking about V8 and how you can, like any vegetable, you know, the parts you normally throw away, like carrot tops, put them in the blender. You know, if you have celery that's wilted, you can put it in water, and guess what? It'll get hard again. You know, or if it's really wilted, blend that and throw it in your mashed potatoes. Delicious. Yeah. You know,
Joseph, I love it. Thank you very much. And that line too, you know, something that's for today is something else for tomorrow. It's all about planning. Thank you so much for the call. Let's squeeze in Vivian in Abbotsford before we go here. I just have about a minute, Vivian, but please go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to talk about peeling vegetables. I have a Japanese daughter-in-law that was horrified when she saw me peeling squashes and throwing the peel into the compost. And so I copied her, and now we eat the entire squash, including the peel. And the other day, and I'm sure that's most vegetable peels are quite edible and very nutritious. And the other day I made soup calling for Yukon Gold potatoes. So I scrubbed them and cut them up without peeling them, and they turned out very well. So you increase the nutritional value and you save yourself a lot of work.
Vivian, thank you very much. I think the Yukon Gold and the yellow broccoli have really resonated with people. Did you know it would be this resonant with the audience, Carly, when you started?
Oh, I did. I had no idea, but it just makes me so happy. And I think together, when we can keep having this conversation, that it's going to inspire more and more people to start reducing their waste.
And I know you have a new book coming out in the coming months.
Yes, it's not out until April, but it's available for pre-order. It's called Plant You Scrappy Cooking, and it's based on everything we've talked about today, mostly meals that can be substituted. So the ingredients can be substituted in and out based on what you have on hand, because that is one of my number one tips for reducing your waste.
Wonderful. I look forward to the book and watching more of your videos and learning more. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was a pleasure. Have a great day.
Our pleasure to have you. Carly Beaudreg is the best-selling author of the book Plant You, and you can find her on TikTok and Instagram at Plant You. That is it for our show today. Thanks so much for all of your suggestions and your tips and your calls in our first half hour as well. You can always let us know what you think. BC Today at cbc.ca. Listen again on the CBC Listen app or watch us again on YouTube. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thank you for joining us. Have a great afternoon.